I raised a boy who wasn't mine because I believed love isn't something you owe, it's something you choose. I chose him when he was 12 and had nobody left. Fed him, educated him, gave him my name and my trust and every door I could open. He chose me back eventually, just not the way I thought. He chose me the way a thief chooses a house with the lights off. Let me tell you something nobody tells you about being a caregiver. It doesn't break you all at once. It doesn't hit you like a freight train and leave you flat on the concrete. No, it takes you apart the way salt air takes apart iron down here in the low country. Slowly, quietly, in ways you don't notice until the morning you're standing in front of the bathroom mirror and you genuinely cannot remember the last time you slept past 5 in the morning. Cannot remember the last meal you ate sitting down at your own table without one ear listening for footsteps in the hallway. Cannot remember the last time someone asked how you were doing and actually stood still long enough to hear the answer. That was me, James Okafor. Jim to everyone who has known me longer than a handshake. 76 years old. Retired professor of biology. 32 years at the University of South Carolina, Beaufort. Born in Enugu, Nigeria, 1949. Arrived in the United States in 1971 with a student visa, 2 suitcases, and the quiet, stubborn belief that a man who works hard enough and loves deeply enough can build something permanent in this world. I built it on Bay Street in Beaufort, South Carolina. If you have never been to Beaufort, let me paint it for you. Live oaks, so old their branches touch the ground, draped in Spanish moss that moves like gray curtains in the afternoon breeze. The smell of salt marsh on every wind that comes off the river. Porches wide enough to hold entire conversations. The kind of town where people still sit outside after dinner and wave at strangers walking past, and they mean it every single time. We bought the house in 1989. A white clapboard house with a deep porch and a backyard that faced the Beaufort River. Carolyn picked it. She walked through the front door, looked at the light coming through the kitchen windows, and said, "James, this is where we stay. This is the one." 37 years of marriage taught me one consistent truth about my wife. When Carolyn decided something, the universe generally agreed with her. I learned to stop arguing about it somewhere around year 8. But the house was only half of what I built. The other half was behind it. My garden. 30 years of my hands in that soil. I grew collards and tomatoes, alongside bitter leaf and uziza from back home. I planted a fig tree the year my daughter Amara was born, and an oak the year I became a United States citizen. Every major moment in my life had a root system somewhere in that backyard. My colleagues at the university used to joke that I loved that garden more than my tenure. I never corrected them. Tenure didn't bloom in April. And Carolyn. Let me tell you about Carolyn, because you need to understand what was at the center of everything I did and everything that was done to me. Carolyn Ann Okafor, née Williams, 73 years old. A librarian for 35 years at the Beaufort County Library on Scott Street. The kind of librarian who remembered not just every book on her shelves, but every person who checked them out. She could tell you what a 12-year-old boy read in 1994 and why it mattered to him 15 years after the fact, without checking a single record. Her memory was her cathedral. She lived inside it with pride and grace, and she kept it immaculate, until she couldn't. The neurologist's name was Dr. Anand Patel. Quiet man, careful hands. The kind of doctor who has delivered devastating news enough times that he has learned to let each word arrive on its own, slowly, gently, so your brain has half a chance of keeping up with your ears. He told us on a Wednesday afternoon, in his office, on Ribot Road. Early stage Alzheimer's. The woman who remembered every book, every borrower, every story she had ever held between her hands was going to lose the ability to hold any of them. I drove home along Bay Street in complete silence. Carolyn fell asleep in the passenger seat somewhere past the National Cemetery, the way she sometimes did after long appointments, head tilted toward the window, one hand resting open on her lap like she was waiting for something to be placed in it. I watched her face at every stoplight. I told myself the same thing I imagine every man in my position tells himself in that exact moment. Drive. Just drive. Get her home. Get her inside. Then fall apart, where she cannot see you do it. I did not fall apart inside the house. I went out to the garden. I sat on the wooden bench I had built in 2003, the one under the fig tree, and I looked at my hands. These hands that had planted every living thing in this yard. These hands that had graded 32 years of biology papers, that had changed diapers, that had held my wife's face on our wedding day in a small church in Enugu while my mother wept in the front row. I looked at my hands and I thought about the only number that mattered anymore. $295,000. Every dollar of it sitting in a retirement account I had built across 3 decades of teaching. Every dollar earmarked for one purpose, and one purpose only. Not for travel. Not for a fishing boat. Not for any of the things men my age are supposed to spend their retirement on. Every dollar was for Carolyn. For the piece of land I had already quietly purchased on Ladies Island, 20 minutes from Bay Street, where I planned to build a small care cottage right next to a garden. Because if Carolyn was going to lose her memory, I wanted her last landscape to be the thing she loved most. Green things growing, soil under sunlight, the smell of something alive. And beneath all of that, beneath the money and the plans and the land, was the specific, deeply private fear I had carried for years, without once saying it out loud to another living soul, that I would die before her, that my eyes, which were already beginning to fail me in ways I had not yet told anyone about, would go dark before hers did, and that she would be left with nothing. No one. No garden. At 76 years old, that fear is not abstract. It is not a thought experiment. It is the last thing I think about every single night before I close my eyes, and it is the first thing waiting for me when I open them at 5 the next morning to give her the first round of medication. 3 days after Dr. Patel's office, my phone rang, and the voice on the other end belonged to a boy I had raised from nothing, saying the exact words I had been praying to hear. Before I tell you what that phone call was, I need to take you back, because if you don't understand who Daniel Okafor was to me, you won't understand why what he did cut so deep that it reached places I didn't even know I had left unprotected. My older brother Emeka died in 2003. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and merciless. He was 49, living in Atlanta, raising his boy alone after his wife left when Daniel was 6. Emeka called me on a Tuesday night in February, 3 weeks before he passed, and asked me one question. "Jimmy, will you take my son?" I said yes before he finished the sentence. That is what you do when your brother asks you something from a hospital bed, with a voice that already sounds like it belongs to the next world. You say yes first. You figure out the rest later. Daniel arrived at Bay Street on a Saturday morning in March, 12 years old. One duffel bag, eyes that had already seen the inside of more waiting rooms than any child should. Carolyn knelt down right there on the porch until she was eye level with him and said, "This is your home now, Daniel, for as long as you want it." I brought him to the garden that first afternoon. I didn't know what else to do. I was a biology professor, not a child psychologist. So I handed him a small spade, pointed to a patch of bare soil, and said, "We're going to plant something." He looked at me like I had lost my mind. But he knelt down, and we planted a row of basil together in complete silence. That evening, I cooked jollof rice, my mother's recipe from Enugu, the one that takes 3 hours and fills the entire house with a smell that is equal parts tomato and memory. Daniel ate 2 full plates without speaking. When he finished, he looked up and said quietly, "My dad used to make this." He hadn't. Emeka couldn't cook to save his life. But I understood what Daniel was actually saying. He was saying, "This feels like home. I raised that boy." Paid his school fees at Beaufort Academy. Drove him to baseball practice every Thursday. Sat in the front row at his graduation, clapping so hard my palms stung for 2 days. Co-signed his first apartment in Charleston. Carolyn and I never had a son. We had Amara, our daughter, and she was everything. But Daniel filled a space in that house I hadn't realized was empty until he was standing in it. Now, his phone call. Uncle Jim. Warm. Steady. The voice of a man who has already decided something. I'm coming back to Beaufort. You can't do this alone. I'm not asking. I'm telling you. I'm coming home. I am not a man who cries easily. My father in Enugu considered tears a structural weakness in a man's character and raised his sons accordingly. I have been to funerals and faculty layoffs, and one very difficult December in 2008 that I do not discuss. I held it together through all of them. I cried on that phone call, could not speak for a full minute, just held the phone to my ear and breathed like a man breaking the surface after a very long time underwater. I thought, this is the boy Carolyn always believed he would become. She always saw something steady and good in Daniel that I sometimes struggled to find, and here he was, proving her right at the exact moment it mattered most. Now let me stop right here, because this is where I need you to pay very close attention. Everything I am about to describe, every warm gesture, every helpful Sunday, every time Daniel showed up and made my life easier, hold all of it alongside one fact I did not learn until much later. The first withdrawal from my retirement account happened 5 days after Daniel moved back to Beaufort. 5 days. He was not coming home because his uncle needed him. He was coming home because he saw an opportunity wearing the face of a family crisis. But I did not know that yet. So let me tell you what I saw, because what I saw was convincing enough to fool a 76-year-old professor who spent 3 decades teaching people how to observe the natural world and thought he knew something about reading what was right in front of him. Daniel rented an apartment on Carteret Street. He was at our house 4, sometimes 5 days a week, came to Carolyn's appointments at Beaufort Memorial, remembered every nurse's name, asked questions that made Dr. Patel tell me once it was really something special to see a nephew so involved. He handled the bills, the insurance calls, the pharmacy pickups on Boundary Street, the grocery runs to the Publix on Ladies Island. He handled everything that was quietly drowning me and made it look effortless. I thanked God for him every single day. Here is what I also need you to know. 6 months before Daniel came back, I had been diagnosed with age-related macular degeneration. My central vision was deteriorating. Faces and shapes I could still manage. But fine print on documents, numbers on bank statements, small text on medicine bottles, all of it had become a blur I could no longer force into focus. I had told no one except Carolyn. And Carolyn, on most days, could no longer remember. I had told her. Month 3. Carolyn had 3 terrible nights in a row. Wandered into the garden at 2 in the morning barefoot, calling for someone named Ruth. Confused, frightened, reaching for flowers in the dark. I brought her inside each time, held her until she stopped trembling. Did not sleep for 4 nights straight. On the 5th morning, I fell in the kitchen. My knees gave way reaching for her medication on the top shelf. I lay on that floor for a full minute and understood with total clarity that I was losing a war I could not win alone. Daniel came that Wednesday evening, sat across from me at the kitchen table on Bay Street. He had a folder. Uncle Jim, I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to really hear me. Measured, patient, like a man who had studied your specific fears and was now handing them back wrapped in a solution. You're 76. If something happens to you tomorrow, what happens to Auntie Carolyn? Everything is in your name. Everything freezes while lawyers sort it out, and she's sitting in this house with nothing she can access. Every word landed exactly where I was most afraid. These are power of attorney documents. It just means I handle the financial side. Bills, accounts, pension. You focus on Auntie Carolyn. Let me carry this. I looked at those documents. I could not read them. Not because I was careless, because my eyes could no longer make out the words on the page. Daniel read them aloud. Every line. Patiently, and I had no way to verify a single word. I signed with hands that were shaking from exhaustion and relief, and the particular gratitude that fills your chest when you believe someone you love has just stepped between you and a weight that was about to crush you. Daniel had everything notarized the next morning at a shipping store on Boundary Street. Mentioned it casually, like it was nothing. I slept better that night than I had in 4 months. I thought I had handed something heavy to someone strong enough to carry it. I had handed him the keys to everything I had ever saved, and my own eyes could not even show me what I had just done. Let me tell you what 18 months of caregiving looks like when your eyes are failing, and your heart is the only thing keeping you upright. 5 in the morning. Every morning, medication first. 2 pills with water, 1 with food. Carolyn sits at the kitchen table in her robe, and sometimes she smiles at me like she knows exactly who I am and exactly why I'm handing her these pills. Those are the good mornings. On the bad ones, she looks at me like I'm a kind stranger in someone else's house, and she takes the pills anyway because something in her still trusts the hands offering them. Afternoons in the garden, that was our ritual. I would walk her slowly down the back steps, her arm in mine, and we would move between the rows together. She loved the garden. She always had. But the names were leaving her. She would stop in front of the fig tree, the one I planted the year Amara was born, and she would reach out and touch the bark and say, "This one is beautiful, James. What is it called?" I would tell her. She would nod. 10 minutes later, she would stop in front of it again and ask the same question with the same wonder in her voice, as if she were seeing it for the very first time. And in a way, she was. Every single time. Daniel came by 3 or 4 times a week during those months, brought groceries, sat with Carolyn, while I showered or closed my eyes for 20 minutes in the back bedroom. He mowed the lawn without being asked, fixed the leaking faucet in the upstairs bathroom, refilled her prescriptions at the CVS on Boundary Street. He was everything a family could ask for, and I told him so regularly. He would smile in that easy way of his and say, "It's nothing, Uncle Jim. This is what family does." I believed him completely. For 18 months, I believed him completely. Now, I need to introduce you to 2 people who matter more than I can properly express. My daughter, Amara Okafor Chen, 38 years old, inherited her mother's eyes and my stubbornness in roughly equal measure. Lives on Ladies Island with her husband and their 2 children. She teaches 4th grade at Beaufort Elementary, which means she has the patience of someone who has been professionally trained to manage chaos without raising her voice. And her husband, David Chen, 42 years old, software engineer, works from home for a cybersecurity firm based in Charleston. David is the kind of man you forget is in the room until the moment you desperately need someone to be in the room. Quiet, observant, the sort of person who notices that a number doesn't add up 3 months before anyone else realizes there was a number to check. Daniel always treated David with a particular kind of casual dismissal at family gatherings. A joke about tech guys here, a skipped handshake there. Nothing dramatic enough to address, just enough to make it clear he considered David furniture. I want to remember that, because furniture doesn't build cases. David did. If you have been listening for a while, and you want stories like this one to keep coming, do us a quick favor right now. Hit that subscribe button. It costs you absolutely nothing, and it means everything to us. Drop a like while you are at it. We will be here when you get back. I promise this story is going nowhere without you. Sunday dinner. Bay Street. The table that has held 30 years of family meals, report cards, arguments, birthday cakes, and one very memorable Thanksgiving in 2011 that we still argue about. I cooked jollof rice. The same recipe. My mother's. The smell filled the house the way it always did. Tomato and onion and something deeper that I have never been able to name but that always makes the house feel like it is breathing. Carolyn was in the floral blouse I have always loved on her. She was having a good day, present, warm, laughing at something Amara said about one of her 4th graders. Daniel sat at the end of the table, loud and generous, refilling glasses, telling a story about a fishing trip near Hunting Island, with the easy confidence of a man who has nothing on his conscience. The grandchildren were running through the hallway, the way grandchildren do on a Sunday evening. It looked like every Sunday dinner we had ever had. It felt like family. It smelled like home. David was quiet. But David was always quiet. So no one noticed that his quiet on this particular evening had a different weight to it. No one noticed the way his jaw was set just slightly tighter than usual, or the way his eyes moved to Daniel and then away again, like a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has decided that tonight is the night he finally sets it down. His hand found mine under the table. He pressed his phone into my palm without looking at me. I glanced down. A tablet screen, the font enlarged to 300%, so that my failing eyes could read it without strain. He had thought of that. He had thought of everything. 8 words on the screen. Check your retirement account. Then say Carolyn needs her medication. I opened the banking app. The font was large enough that for the first time in over a year, I could see the numbers clearly, perfectly, with devastating, absolute clarity. $4,800. There had been $295,000 in that account. Daniel was laughing at his own punchline across the table. Carolyn was smiling along, warm and present, even though she had lost the thread of his story 2 sentences ago. The grandchildren were running. The house smelled like Sunday. I placed my hand flat against the table to steady myself. I think Carolyn needs her evening medication, I said. My voice sounded normal. I have no idea how. I'm going to take her upstairs for a moment. Amara was on her feet before I finished. She understood something was happening even though she didn't yet know what. She helped me to the door. David followed. Daniel stayed at the table and called after us from the warmth of my house, from the chair where he had eaten my mother's jollof rice as a 12-year-old boy with nowhere else to go. Take care of yourself, Uncle Jim. I worry about you. I sat in David's car, and the first thought I had was not about myself. It was not about the money. It was about a piece of land on Ladies Island, where a small cottage was supposed to stand beside a garden. A place where Carolyn could grow old surrounded by green things and sunlight and the smell of soil. And the man who had sold that land out from under her was standing in my doorway on Bay Street, waving goodbye like he had not taken a single thing. David did not drive to a hospital. He did not drive to a police station. He drove to his house on Ladies Island, pulled into the driveway without a word, and led me inside to his home office at the back of the house. A small room, neat desk, 2 monitors. The kind of room that belongs to a man who solves problems methodically, 1 line of code at a time. He closed the door, sat down, looked at me the way a doctor looks at you right before he tells you something you cannot unhear. Anthony. He had never called me by my first name before. It was always Uncle Jim or Dad. Everything I'm about to show you has been verified. Multiple times. I didn't come to you with a suspicion. I came to you with a file. How long have you known? I asked. 4 months. I let that sit. Did not get angry about it. Not yet. Because the look on David's face told me those 4 months had not been comfortable ones for him either. Why did you wait? He folded his hands on the desk. Because Amara needed to be completely certain before we destroyed her brother in front of her father. And because I needed every single door closed before you knew one was open. Then he turned to his laptop and began. It had started, David explained, with something small. 3 months before Daniel moved back, David had built a simple program to track Carolyn's medical expenses. Nothing complicated. Just a spreadsheet that automatically cross-referenced insurance claims with pharmacy receipts and doctor's bills. He had built it because he liked solving problems, because Amara worried about her parents, and because David Chen is the kind of man who believes that if a system exists, it should be organized. 5 months ago, the program flagged an error. An insurance reimbursement for a medication Carolyn had never been prescribed. David knew this because his mother-in-law's actual prescription list was pinned to the refrigerator on Bay Street, and the flagged medication was not on it. 1 error. 1 number that didn't match. He pulled the thread, and the whole thing unraveled. 14 months of structured withdrawals. Always between $2,000 and $4,500. Never above $9,000. Spaced at irregular intervals. Never the same week twice. Never the same amount twice. Careful enough to avoid automatic federal reporting triggers. This has a name, David said, sliding the first document across the desk. It's called structuring. and it's a federal crime entirely separate from the fraud itself. Then the medical bills. Daniel had been submitting fabricated invoices to Carolyn's insurance. Medications she never took. Therapy sessions that never happened. Specialist consultations that existed only on paper. David's program had caught every single one, because the code didn't care about charm. It only cared about whether the numbers matched. They didn't. Then the land. David pulled up property records on his second monitor. The piece of land on Ladies Island. The one I had purchased quietly, specifically, with the last clear vision I had of Carolyn's future. The lot where I was going to build a care cottage beside a garden so that when Carolyn could no longer remember my name, she would at least be surrounded by the thing she loved most. Daniel had used my power of attorney to sell it. To a developer. Below market value. I stared at the transfer document, and I felt something move through me that I do not have a clean word for. Not anger. Not grief. Something older and colder than both. Then the pension. Daniel had contacted my pension administrator directly using the legal paperwork I had signed at the kitchen table on Bay Street. He presented documentation requesting that my monthly retirement distributions be redirected to an account he controlled. The administrator processed it without question. Why would they? The paperwork was perfect. Daniel had made sure of it. Then the mail. Daniel had quietly changed the correspondence address on my retirement account to a private post office box he had opened on Boundary Street. I had not received a paper statement in over a year, and because Daniel handled the finances, because that was our arrangement, because I trusted him and my eyes could not verify what my heart refused to suspect, I had never noticed they stopped coming. I had been flying blind in every sense of the word. David paused. I could see him steadying himself for what came next. Then Carolyn's account. She had kept a small private savings her entire adult life. Her own quiet money from 35 years of working at the library. She never talked about it much. It was just hers. The way women of her generation sometimes kept something small and personal. A quiet proof that they existed independently in the world. Gone. Every cent. Liquidated using her power of attorney on a day when she could not remember what month it was. Then the beneficiary form. A document I had signed on a rushed morning when Carolyn had been up most of the night and I was running on nothing. Daniel had arrived with coffee and a stack of papers. Routine account maintenance, Uncle Jim. I've handled everything. Among those papers was a form removing Amara and the grandchildren from my retirement account entirely, replacing them with Daniel. My own hand, my own signature. Removing my daughter from everything I had spent my life building. David was not finished. For several months, Daniel had been making quiet observations to extended family, at church, at cookouts, in the parking lot after Sunday service. Things like, Uncle Jim's really struggling. He can't see well enough to manage his own affairs. I've had to step in more than anyone realizes. An elder law attorney David had privately consulted recognized the pattern immediately. Daniel was laying groundwork for an incompetency petition. If he could get me declared legally incompetent through a court proceeding, and he had been patiently building that case for months, everything he was doing illegally would become court-sanctioned. He would own me. Legally. Completely. He was not just stealing from me. He was building a cage around a blind man, one quiet comment at a time. David's phone rang. Amara. He answered on speaker. Her voice was controlled, barely. She told us Carolyn was fine. The grandchildren were settled. Daniel was still at Bay Street, hovering, performing concern. Then she paused. Dad, she said quietly, Auntie Carolyn just told Daniel he's a good boy. She patted his hand. Nobody spoke. I sat in that chair, in the back room of a quiet house, on Ladies Island, and I looked at David Chen. The man nobody pays attention to at dinner. The man Daniel had treated like furniture for years. The man who had spent 4 months in silence building a case so clean it could not be argued against. Because he believed my daughter deserved the truth, and my wife deserved to be protected. What do you want to do? David asked. I looked at him. I want every door locked before he tries a single handle. Not for me. For her. For the garden she loves. David nodded once. He already had a plan. Revenge is loud. Justice is quiet. I chose the one that actually helps her. There is something nobody tells you about justice. It doesn't feel the way you think it will. You spend your whole life watching movies where the good guy gets his moment. The confrontation, the speech, the satisfaction of watching the villain understand what they've done. You think when your moment comes, it is going to feel like winning, like exhaling after holding your breath for a very long time. What nobody tells you is that when it is real, when the villain is someone you raised, it doesn't feel like winning at all. It feels like amputation, necessary, correct, and permanent. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. The office of Rachel Simmons on Carteret Street, 12 minutes from my house. David had already called ahead. She was expecting me. I walked in with every document David had compiled over 4 months, and she went through them the way a surgeon goes through a body, methodically, without flinching, seeing exactly what needed to come out. By noon that same day, every power of attorney document Daniel held over me and Carolyn had been formally revoked, every single one, filed, processed, and effective immediately. Daniel lost all legal access to both accounts before he sat down to eat his Monday lunch. He had no idea. Rachel then initiated emergency beneficiary correction proceedings with my retirement account administrator. The form I had unknowingly signed, the one that removed Amara and the grandchildren and replaced them with Daniel, was reversed. My daughter and my grandchildren were restored. Daniel was removed. He still had no idea. Day 2. David's file was handed to the Beaufort County Sheriff's Office Financial Crimes Unit. The evidence package was so clean and so complete that the lead investigator, a detective named Marcus Webb, told David it was the most organized case file he had received from a civilian in 9 years. David nodded once and said, "Thank you. That is the most David Chen has ever said in response to a compliment, and I suspect it always will be." Day 3. Daniel came to Bay Street. He brought fruit, mangoes, because he knew I loved them. He sat with Carolyn while she watched her afternoon program, straightened the living room without being asked, and then joined me in the garden where I was watering the tomatoes. We stood there together in the late afternoon light, the Spanish moss hanging still in the humid air, the Beaufort River catching the last of the sun behind the trees. I looked at this boy, this man, the 12-year-old who had arrived with one duffel bag and eyes too old for his face. The man who had eaten my mother's jollof rice and said his father used to make it. The man who had learned to plant basil beside me in silence on his first day in my home. I picked up the garden hose and continued watering. "You know, Danny," I said, not looking at him, "the most important thing about a garden is knowing exactly what's growing in it." He laughed. "Easy. Relaxed. You and your garden wisdom, Uncle Jim." I kept watering. He had no idea what I meant. Every door around him was already locked. He just hadn't tried any of them yet. Day 4. Amara went to the house on Bay Street on a Tuesday morning while Daniel thought she was at school. She moved through her childhood home with her spare key and a list of original documents Rachel Simmons needed. Files from the back office. Paperwork Daniel didn't know she could access because he had never considered that Amara might stop defending him long enough to move against him. She told me later that she did not allow herself to feel anything while she was inside the house. She was focused, efficient. She felt nothing until she was back in her car in the driveway with the documents on the passenger seat. Then she sat there for 15 minutes. I did not ask her what those 15 minutes felt like. I already knew. Day 5. Rachel Simmons initiated emergency Medicaid planning proceedings, identifying every protective measure still available given the documented fraud. She found pathways I didn't know existed, legal structures that could still shield Carolyn's care options, even with the account emptied the way it had been. And then the filing that mattered most. A legal action to void the land sale on Ladies Island. Fraudulent transfer, executed under a power of attorney obtained through manipulation of a visually impaired elderly adult. The developer's attorney reviewed the documentation and did not even attempt to contest it. The land was recoverable. The piece of earth where Carolyn was supposed to watch a garden grow. The cottage I had imagined in the dark on nights when I was too tired to sleep and too frightened to stop planning. It was coming back. For the first time in 9 days, I exhaled all the way. Carolyn was going to be okay. Day 6. Daniel returned. He stayed longer this time, asked careful questions about my health, wondered aloud whether I had thought about updating my estate planning documents. Just being responsible, Uncle Jim. Just thinking ahead. I looked at my nephew for a long, quiet moment. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. You're absolutely right, Danny, I said. I should be thinking ahead. He smiled. Satisfied. He drove home. Every door around him was locked. He just hadn't reached for any of them yet. Day 7. Sunday morning. I called Daniel. Danny, I'm feeling much better. Come to dinner at the house tonight. I'm making your favorite. I paused. Let the silence hold for just a moment. Mama's jollof of rice. He said he would be there at 6. I hung up the phone and stood in my garden for a long time. I touched the bark of the oak tree I had planted the year I became a citizen. 30 years of growing. I ran my fingers along the rough surface the way you touch something you are saying goodbye to. Not the tree, not the garden, something else. I thought about roots. I thought about what I had taught Daniel about patience and about things that grow slowly in good soil. I thought about what he had chosen to do with every single lesson I had ever given him. Then I went inside and began to cook. Daniel arrived at Bay Street at 6 o'clock with an expensive bottle of wine and the widest smile he had been wearing for 18 months. He handed me the bottle at the door and said, "Smells incredible in here, Uncle Jim. Just like when I was a kid." He was right about the smell. It was the same. My mother's jollof rice does not change. The recipe does not bend or adapt or become something else over time. It is what it is, the same way it was in Enugu in 1963 when she taught it to me in a kitchen with no air conditioning and a window that faced the market road. Tomato, onion, scotch, bonnet, thyme, bay leaf, and thyme. Always thyme. You cannot rush jollof rice. You can only stand beside it and wait for it to become what it was always going to be. The table was set carefully. Candles. The good plates, the ones Carolyn had picked out at a shop in Charleston 20 years ago and only allowed on the table for occasions that mattered. The dining room windows were open to the garden, and the last light of the evening was coming through the Spanish moss in long golden threads that made everything in the room look like a painting of something you were about to lose. Carolyn was in the floral blouse, the one I have always loved. She was having a good day. Present. Warm. She told a story from 1991 about a boy who came into the library every single Tuesday and only ever checked out books about trains, and she told it with such clarity and such gentle humor that Amara laughed, despite everything she was carrying inside her chest. Amada, sitting at that table with her mother's laugh in her ears, and 4 months of her brother's betrayal in her bones, holding it together with nothing but love and sheer will. David sat beside her, quiet, steady, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what he had done, which was everyone at that table, except me. Daniel sat across from me and was everything he had always performed being: charming, generous, devoted. He refilled glasses without being asked. He told a story about a boat trip near Hunting Island that made the grandchildren shriek with laughter. He cut Carolyn's food into small pieces without making a production of it. He called her auntie and touched her shoulder, and she looked up at him with complete and total warmth. "Danny boy," she said softly, "you were always such a good boy." I watched him receive that sentence. I watched him smile at it. I watched him take it from a woman whose private savings he had emptied on a day she could not remember what month it was, and I watched him hold it in his hands like a gift he deserved. The food was good. The company was almost convincing. The candles flickered. The grandchildren eventually settled on the living room floor with their tablets, and the house on Bay Street felt, for one last hour, like every Sunday it had ever held. Then, midway through the second course, there was a knock at the front door. I stood up slowly. I walked to the door. My floors. My house. My 30 years. My garden on the other side of the back wall. My wife at the table in the blouse I loved. My daughter holding herself together with nothing but courage. My son-in-law, who had saved everything and asked for nothing in return. I opened the door. 2 detectives. Plain clothes. Paperwork in hand. Professional. Calm. Completely unhurried. I had spoken with them 3 days earlier. They knew exactly where they were going, and exactly who they were there for. I stepped aside. They walked in. I heard Daniel stop talking mid-sentence. The sound of a man's voice cutting off the way a light cuts off when you pull the cord. One moment it's there, the next it isn't. I watched my nephew's face in the moment he understood what was happening. And I need to tell you something, because this part matters. There was no guilt on his face first. Not even close. His eyes moved fast across the room. To me. To David. To Amara. To the door. Looking for the exit that did not exist. There was no exit. Every door was locked. Every single one. Amara stood up slowly. She had been thinking about what she wanted to say for 9 days. She had rehearsed it, revised it, stripped it down to something clean and unbreakable. Look at Auntie Carolyn before you leave this house, Daniel. The room went quiet. Daniel looked at Carolyn. Carolyn was looking back at her nephew with complete warmth. She did not understand what was happening around her. She thought perhaps Daniel was leaving early after a lovely dinner, the way he sometimes did. She didn't want him to go yet. She lifted her hand. She waved gently. Jim, where is Danny going? Tell him dinner isn't over yet. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The sentence filled the room the way the smell of jollof of rice had filled it an hour earlier. Completely. In every corner. Amara let it sit. Let it breathe. Let every person at that table feel the full, impossible weight of what Carolyn's disease had just done. Protected Daniel from ever having to watch her face change. He would never see his aunt understand what he had done. Her Alzheimer's would carry him safely through the rest of her life with his name clean and warm in her memory. He would never have to earn that. Then Amara spoke. Quiet. Direct. Final. Her mind will protect you, Daniel. You will never have to watch her understand what you did to this family. But I understand it. Dad understands it. Every withdrawal you made, while he was awake at 5 in the morning giving her medication, every document you had him sign that his own eyes couldn't read, every time you sat at this table and let him thank God for you, I know all of it, and I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure both of them are okay. Not because I have to, because that is what loving someone actually looks like. Daniel was walked out the front door of the house on Bay Street. Carolyn watched him go from her chair at the dinner table. She waved cheerfully, warmly, the way she always did when family left after Sunday dinner. Come back soon, Danny boy, she said softly. I stood in the doorway of my house and watched the car pull away into the Beaufort evening. The Spanish moss hung still. The garden was dark behind me. The smell of my mother's jollof rice was still in every room. I looked down at my hands. The hands that had planted a garden. The hands that had raised a boy. The hands that had signed documents they could not read. The hands that had cooked his favorite meal one last time. For the first time in my life, they felt completely empty. I did not go inside right away. I stood on the porch of the house on Bay Street and listened to the Beaufort evening settle around me. Crickets in the marsh grass. The faint sound of water behind the trees. And through the screen door, the quiet sounds of Amara clearing plates and David washing dishes and my wife humming something old. Something that lived in a part of her memory that even Alzheimer had not yet found. I looked at my hands one more time. Then I went inside. Because that is what you do. You go back in. You wash the dishes. You check her medication. You set the alarm for 5 in the morning. And you keep going. Not because you are strong. Because she needs you to keep going. That has always been enough. Daniel pleaded guilty. The evidence David had built was too clean and too complete for any attorney to argue against. elder, financial abuse, criminal fraud, federal structuring charges, fabrication of medical documents. The judge, a woman named Honorable Catherine Price, looked at Daniel across that courtroom with the kind of quiet disappointment that cuts deeper than anger ever could. Restitution was ordered. It comes back slowly, in pieces. The way he took it, some of it will not come back at all. I have made my peace with that. Or I am making it. Some days, that is the honest best a man can do. But the land came back. The piece of earth on Lady's Island that I had bought with the last clear vision I had for Carolyn's future. The fraudulent sale was voided. The title was restored. Rachel Simmons, God bless that woman, and every sharp, tireless hour she spent in that office on Carteret Street, made certain the legal protections around that property were so thorough that no one could touch it again. The cottage beside the garden, the place where Carolyn will sit in the sunlight and smell the soil and watch green things grow, even when she can no longer remember why they matter. It is reachable. She will be okay. Not perfect. Not the life we planned across 37 years of marriage. But okay. And okay right now is everything. I think about Amara often. She spent most of her life defending Daniel. To me. To her mother. To cousins who whispered at family reunions. To her own doubts at 2 in the morning. She covered for him, explained him, loved him past every reason not to, because that is what she believed family meant. And when the moment came, she stood at that table and said the truest, hardest thing anyone in that room had ever heard. I know what it cost her. I know because I watched her taillights stop at the end of Bay Street that night for a very long time before they moved again. Some things you have to sit with alone before you can carry them in company. But what my daughter did at that table was the bravest thing I have witnessed in 76 years of living. God gave me that girl, and I have thanked him for her every single day since. David. What do I say about David that this story has not already said? He is not a loud man. He does not tell stories at dinner or refill your glass or make you laugh until your ribs ache. He is the man who sits quietly and notices that a number does not add up. He is the man who spends 4 months in silence building something unbreakable because he believes the people he loves deserve the truth. He is the man who showed me the worst thing I have ever seen on a laptop screen, and then looked at me and said, "What do you want to do?" Not what should we do? What do you want to do? Because he understood that it was my family, my pain, my choice. He stood beside me in the garden a few weeks after the trial. Evening light coming through the moss the way it does in Beaufort when the season turns. He put his hand on my shoulder, quiet for a while. Then, almost to himself, "You gave him everything, Dad. That says everything about you. What he did with it says everything about him. Dad. Not Uncle Jim. Dad. Daniel was my brother's blood. I chose him because of obligation and love, and a promise I made to a dying man in Atlanta. But David chose me. No obligation, no promise, no blood between us. He chose me because he married my daughter and decided that her family was his family and that protecting them was not a duty but a privilege. And when everything that should have held fell apart, when the boy I raised used my love as a key to rob me blind, it was the man who chose me who put it all back together. God works like that sometimes. He does not send you what you expect. He sends you what you need, and sometimes what you need is a quiet man who writes code and washes dishes, and calls you Dad on a Tuesday evening in a garden in Beaufort, South Carolina. I still go out to the garden every morning. 5:15. After the first round of medication. The air is cool. The river smells like salt and mud, and something green I have never been able to name. I walk between the rows slowly. My eyes are worse now. I cannot read seed packets anymore, but my hands remember where everything is planted. They always have. Carolyn sits on the bench under the fig tree most mornings. She does not always know where she is. She does not always know who I am. But she likes the garden. She sits and watches the light move through the branches, and smiles in a way that makes me believe, every single time, that somewhere deep inside the cathedral of her memory, there is still a room with the door open, and the windows full of sun. Last Tuesday morning, I was kneeling beside the raised bed pulling weeds. She reached over and touched my arm. I looked up. Her eyes were clear, focused, present in a way they had not been in weeks. "The garden looks beautiful today, James," she said. James, not Jim. Not the blank, gentle warmth she usually offers. My full name. The name she said when she agreed to marry me in Enugu. The name she whispered the night Amara was born. I knelt in the dirt beside my wife and took her hand in both of mine. These hands. The hands that planted every living thing in this garden. The hands that raised a boy who broke my heart. The hands that signed papers they could not read. The hands that cooked jollof rice one last time. The hands that felt empty in a doorway on a Sunday night. They did not feel empty anymore. "It does, Carolyn," I said. "It really does. If this story touched something in your heart, I want you to know that sharing it helps more than you realize. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me about someone who chose you when they didn't have to. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss stories like this one. Stories about family, about truth, about the people who stay when staying is the hardest choice there is. Thank you for being here. God bless every single one of you. I will see you on the next one.